PHI 204, Study Session 4, St. Augustine of Hippo. Introduction. In this study session, we shall look at the philosophical teachings of St. Augustine, who is no doubt one of the most renowned scholars in history. One of the founders of Christian theology, his writings commanded unquestionable authority and respect throughout the Middle Ages and influenced Christian theology from his time to date. He is mainly famous for his effort to bring Platonism and Neoplatonism into agreement with the Christian doctrine. In all, we shall look at how he tried to explain the possibility of certitude in human knowledge, his argument for the existence of God, his conception of time, and his ethics, which will give us an insight into his idea of justice. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this study session, you should be able to describe the type of life led by St. Augustine before his conversion. State what led St. Augustine to renounce worldly pleasures. Describe the reasons why St. Augustine is regarded as one of the most renowned scholars in the medieval period. State the principal focus of St. Augustine's epistemology. Describe how St. Augustine argues for the existence of God. State what St. Augustine considers to be the goal of human behavior in his thoughts on ethics. And lastly, describe St. Augustine's view on justice. Some notes on St. Augustine's background. St. Augustine was born in Tagaste, in the African province of Numidia in 354 AD, to a pagan father, while his mother, Monica, was a devoted Christian. His intense concern over his personal destiny provided the driving force for his philosophical activities. He suffered from moral turmoil in his early youth, and consequently, this drove him to a lifelong quest for true wisdom and spiritual peace. At the age of 16, Augustine began the study of rhetoric in Carthage. His mother had groomed him in the ways of Christian thoughts and behavior, but he left his religious faith and morality, taking a mistress who gave him a son. His thirst for knowledge impelled his mind to rigorous study, and as such, he became a successful student of rhetoric. A series of personal experiences led him to this unique approach of philosophy at the age of 19. He read the Hortensius of Cicero, which was an exhortation to achieve philosophical wisdom. This gingered his passion for learning, but he was left with the problem of where to find intellectual certainty. Elsewhere, it is noted that Augustine lived a life of extravagant pleasure, including sexual pleasures, among others, which was in direct contrast with his later monkish life. However, financial inadequacies led him to teach in Rome, where he accepted a teaching post in Milan, where he showed his vast knowledge of ancient Greek philosophy, Neoplatonism in particular. While in Milan, he was highly impressed by the eloquence and teachings of Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan. Consequently, he was converted to Christianity in 386 AD. This newly found faith led him to renounce worldly pleasures while embracing the church. Soon, he found his own monastic community in Tagaste, which lasted only for some years as he entered and accepted the Catholic priesthood. Augustine eventually became the Bishop of Hippo in 396 AD. It must be noted that he never left North Africa for the last 39 years of his life. Rome was sacked by the Goths in 410 AD, and in 429, the Vandals crossed the North Africa from Spain and laid siege to Hippo. Augustine died in 430 at the age of 75, shortly before the fall of Hippo. St. Augustine's contribution to medieval philosophy. There is no doubt that St. Augustine is regarded as one of the most renowned scholars in the medieval period. He is regarded as a scholar who applied his intellect principally in theology, where his importance and fame lie primarily. He was one of the founders of Christian theology and the greatest father of the church. His writings commanded unquestionable authority and respect throughout the Middle Ages and influenced Christian theology from his time to date. Augustine was a prolific writer, and his major philosophical works include Contra Academicos 386, De Libero Arbitris 390, The Confessions 401, The City of God 426, as well as the Trinitate 419. He is mainly famous for his effort to bring Platonism and Neoplatonism into agreement with the Christian doctrine. Nevertheless, in considering Augustine and his philosophy, it must be noted that he does not regard the philosophical and Christian lives as essentially in conflict. Hence, he maintains that philosophy and religion aim at the same object, which he ultimately sees as the happy or blessed life. St. Augustine's philosophical thoughts. As reasoned by Augustine, philosophy is essentially religious, and this conception permeates his thinking. He had very little problem with philosophical speculations about the natural world, while insisting that his concern was to examine only two things, two realities, God and the soul. Furthermore, for Augustine, the view of natural scientific investigation is based on the Platonic conception of knowledge and reality. That is, what is real and what can be known is not found in transitory things of the natural world. If philosophy or reason cannot bring us to the blessed life on its own, it can nevertheless play a vital role in that life. St. Augustine opined that blessed life must, as a matter of fact, begin with Christian faith and so with belief. To believe something is not just with assent, and so one may believe something without understanding it. For him, one comes to the understanding of something only by having a rational demonstration or by being directly acquainted with that thing. Augustine's quest for knowledge led him to join the Manichaean school, a philosophic religious school founded by Mani in the 3rd century AD. Interestingly, this school claimed to have answers to the questions concerning the source of evil in the world. For St. Augustine, God, who is infinitely good, cannot be the source of evil in the world. In an attempt to explain the source of evil, the Manichaeans maintain that there are two ultimate principles and sources of things that exist, namely Omzed, which is the principle of good, and Ahriman, the principle of evil. They hold that Ahriman is the source of evil, darkness, and all other material things. They are of the opinion that man's soul came from the Omzed, the principle of good, while the body came from the Ahriman, the principle of evil. These two principles are in perpetual conflict with each other, and this conflict is reflected in things that come from them. Hence, light and darkness, spirit and matter, good and evil, among others, are in perpetual conflict. Augustine, at the first instance, accepted this philosophy only to reject it later. Augustine's epistemology. In his epistemology, Augustine attacked and refuted skepticism. Some philosophers doubted the possibility of knowing anything for certain. But this is not the case for Augustine, who asserts that anyone who doubts the possibility of knowing anything for certain knows at least one thing for certain, which is the fact that he doubts. As regards some philosophers who doubt the existence of anything, as well as the existence of all things, Augustine argued that the person is at least sure of his own existence and that his doubt is a confirmation of his existence or a proof of his own existence, since only human beings or existing beings doubt. Thus, Augustine points out that skepticism involves self-contradiction when he says that anyone who says that nothing is certain or that nobody can know anything for certain is contradicting himself. Is he certain of what he is saying? If he says that nobody can know anything for certain, or that nobody can be sure of anything, he should be asked whether he knows what he's saying or whether he's sure of it. If he says that he's sure of what he's saying, then he's contradicting himself. Following the Platonic philosophical tradition, Augustine is of the view that objects of true knowledge are eternal truths or ideas, which are immutable and not the material things of this world that are highly mutable. But contrary to what Plato holds, that these internal immutable ideas are resident in the world or forms, Augustine maintains that they are in the mind of God. That is why for him, when we acquire true knowledge, it means that our mind perceives and grasps these internal and immaterial objects or ideas. Here, there is a seeming problem with the above notion, and that is, since the human mind is not eternal and not immutable, then the eternal truths and ideas are superior to the human mind. And if this is the case, how then is the human mind able to perceive as well as grasp the internal realities or ideas that are in the mind of God? St. Augustine opines that the human mind is able to do so by the help of divine illumination. This divine illumination is what the human mind needs in order to grasp the internal realities that transcends it. With this divine illumination, the human mind acquires true and certain knowledge. Also vital is the fact that in Augustine's philosophy, Plato's world of ideas, the real world, is taken to be the mind of God, while the idea of good, which illuminates all other ideas of Plato, is God himself or divine light. Basically, at the heart of Augustine's philosophy is the belief that only through faith can wisdom be attained. Hence, philosophy and religion are geared towards the same thing, which is truth. But then, the former is inferior to the latter in search for the divine truth and wisdom. Augustine strongly holds that a philosopher without faith could never get to the ultimate truth, which for him is beatitude or enjoying of truth. And so for him, although reason alone could attain some truth, rational thought is the servant of faith. Augustine on the existence of God. In an attempt to explain God's existence, Augustine saw the universe as an effect of a cause. For him, every effect points to and reveals its cause, and so from an effect, one can proceed or get to the creator. Thus, he opined that creation points and reveals its creator. He says that if we reflect on beautiful things, we can be led to the source of beauty itself. Also, from good things, we can be led to the source of goodness and so forth. He maintains, further, that by reflecting on truth, the eternal and immutable truth, we can be led to the source of truth, who is God. For all things there are sources of those things, and then truth and goodness have sources and can only lead us to God, since God is the absolute truth and goodness, hence his existence. In other words, there must be a source of these internal and immutable truths. There must be a source of beauty, which is imperfectly reflected here in things that are beautiful. There must be a source of goodness, a source of perfection. There must be a perfect and eternal standard against which we implicitly measure the degree of goodness, of beauty, and of perfection in things. This perfect and eternal standard is God. Augustine also relied on the universal conviction of mankind that God exists. If God did not exist, how would the whole human race become convinced of his existence? Human beings can grasp this truth, and they are independent of our judgment. These truths have foundations, which must be superior to human beings, and so their basis must be the eternal and immutable truth, which is God. According to Augustine, God created all things out of nothing, following the two seemingly contradictory ideas of creation, that things of this world were created sequentially on the one hand, and that God created all things together on the other hand. Augustine appeals to the doctrine of seminal reasons or causes in a bid to deal with the above theological dilemma. He maintains that seminal reasons, which are invisible potentialities, which come to realize themselves through time, were created by God at once. Therefore, all of history and development of the world were present at creation in form of seminal reasons. This, however, implies that God included the capacity or potentiality of further development in the course of time in the created things at creation. That is, the things that will come into existence in future are already in the created things, just like seeds waiting for the due time. Augustine on the concept of time. On the concept of time, Augustine says that time is an elusive concept, that is, if you want to lay hold on time, it evades or eludes your grasp. He further says that time, in a sense, is treated with less attention, a common concept that most people know but do not bother about. Even though we talk of time, that is, the past, present, and future, neither the past nor the future really exist. The past is gone and the future yet to come, but even the present itself is just but a passing moment, which will definitely turn to pass. The issue of time becomes a puzzling concern, for if creation is from nothing, what was God doing before he created the world? Does it then make any sense to speak of absolute beginning? In response to these questions, Augustine urges that time is not independent of creation but consequent to it. He further states that independently of creation, there is no time, so the question of what happened before creation does not arise. He contends further that time is not something in which events happen, rather, it is just a relation between events. According to him, what we call the past is nothing other than the human mind, as it remembers. It has no objective existence outside of this. The future is simply the human mind in its expectation. The future, too, has no objective existence outside of the mind. Augustine's Ethics. Augustine asserts that moral theory was not just some special or isolated subject, and that everything culminates in morality, in clarifying for humanity the sure path to happiness. He therefore sees happiness as the goal of human behavior. The above is so because Augustine believes that the human being has a natural desire for happiness. He further expresses this opinion in his Confessions when he says, "O God, thou hast created us for thyself, so that our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee." Augustine notes further that no transitory and imperfect happiness can satisfy this human desire, because the happiness which the human heart is seeking is a perfect one, eternal and immutable happiness. Thus, God alone and no other can satisfy this natural desire for the human heart, and it is only by turning to God that man can attain the happiness that his heart seeks. Augustine maintains that humanity's moral quest is the inevitable outcome of a specific and concrete condition, and the condition is that humanity is made in such a way that one has no other option than to seek happiness. The ancient Greeks had considered happiness as the culmination of good life, but Augustine's theory provided an estimate of what constitutes happiness and how it could be achieved, whereas Aristotle opined that happiness is achieved when a person fulfills natural functions through a well-balanced life. Augustine asserts that happiness requires that a person should go beyond the natural to the supernatural. He believes that there is no purely natural person, since nature did not produce or create people, but God, who is supernatural, did. And so to get or attain happiness, one must go beyond the natural to the supernatural. Human beings have a free will to either seek this happiness or not. And since this will is free, it can choose to turn to God or to turn away from God, to do good or to do evil. God, from the time of creation, has impressed the moral law on the human heart, so that nobody is ignorant of the fundamental moral principles. Hence, the human intellect is illuminated by the divine light to perceive the grasp theoretical truth, and also illuminated to perceive the basic practical truth, the fundamental principles of morality. However, Augustine acknowledges that man is morally weak and that man's will has been weakened by original sin, and so man is unable to do any good without the help of God, which is manifested in his grace. Therefore, man's will needs the divine grace to enable it to observe the moral law, to do good and avoid evil. The fact of good and evil in the world leads us to Augustine's two cities. In Augustine's thoughts, there are two cities, the city of God and the city of man. Every human being is either a citizen of one or the other. The citizens of the city of God are those motivated by the love of God, those who observe the moral laws, those who do good, while those who do not do good are motivated by self-love and flout the moral laws, thereby turning away from God as citizens of the city of man. Augustine states that the whole of human history is the outcome of the interplay between these two basic motivating principles, the love of God and self-love, and this has divided human beings into two camps, citizens of the city of God and citizens of the city of man. Having discussed the love of God and self-love, Augustine further looks at the role of love and maintains that it is inevitable for human beings to love, and to love is to go beyond oneself and to put one's affection upon an object of love. Nevertheless, the incomplete nature of human beings makes it inevitable for people to love, so as to gain some sort of happiness and satisfaction. There are objects that people can choose to love, and these reflect the varieties of ways in which people are incomplete, and this varies from person to person. He holds that some people can love physical objects, while others love persons, and some others have love of oneself. He holds further that everything in the world is good, because all things come from God alone, who himself is goodness in full. Based on the above, all things are objects of love, and so nothing is evil in itself. For him, therefore, evil is not a positive thing, but the absence of good. The fact that human beings are not totally physical, that is to say, that there is spiritual dimension of the human being, and this readily brings to mind that our needs are not all physical in that primary sense. Human beings were made to love God. A person's nature was made so that only God, the infinite, can give the person ultimate satisfaction or happiness. And so man must love God, because to live well is nothing other than to love God. To love God is the ultimate requirement for happiness, because only God can satisfy this need. And so, if one expects ultimate happiness and satisfaction from other things instead of God alone, he or she displays or shows disordered love towards a thing other than God, that he or she expects ultimate happiness and satisfaction from. On this, Augustine says, all people confidently expect that they can achieve true happiness by loving objects, other persons, and themselves. While these are all legitimate objects of love, people's love of them is disordered when these are loved for the sake of ultimate happiness. Disordered love consists in expecting more from an object of love than it is capable of providing. Disordered love produces all forms of pathology in human behavior. Normal self-love becomes pride, and pride is the cardinal sin that affects all aspects of people's conduct. The essence of pride is the assumption of self-sufficiency. Regrettably, this assumption of self-sufficiency leads to pride, which turns people away from God and leads them to many forms of evil. And when this is the case, the soul is disfigured, and thus, this disordered love produces a disordered person within the shortest possible time, and the disordered persons in turn produce a disordered community. Augustine believes that to reconstruct the disordered community, the disordered person must first be reconstructed, and this reconstruction or salvation of the human being is only possible by reconstructing or reordering the person's love, by loving the proper things properly. We can only love a person properly by loving God first, and when we love God first, we will not expect to derive from human love what can only be derived from the love of God. Evil emanates because of disordered love, and so Augustine did not agree with Plato, who holds that the cause of evil is simply ignorance, but believes that free will, that is, the human will, is the cause or source of evil in the world. Even though God created the world as well as the human being, that evil exists in the world cannot be attributed in any way to God's activity. Even the natural evils like earthquakes, birth defects, among others, for Augustine, makes for diversity in creation, and so are ultimately part of the best possible world. Since evil is the consequence of the rejection of God, he believes that evil is not a positive fact in creation. If it were, it would necessarily have to be attributed to God, the maker of all things. And so, evil is a simple lack, a privation of good. It is simply the lack of correct order or harmony in the human will. Augustine on justice. According to Augustine, there is a single source of truth, and all human beings recognize this truth and know it for the purposes of conduct as natural law or natural justice. Augustine sees natural law as humans' intellectual, sharing in God's truth or God's internal law. He says further that internal law is the divine reason and the will of God which commands the maintenance or observance of the natural order of things and which forbids the disturbance of it. Therefore, since internal law is God's reason which commands orderliness, a person's intellectual grasp of the internal principle is called natural law. Therefore, when a political state makes laws, such temporal laws must be in concurrence with the principles of natural laws, which in turn is derived from the internal law. More so, since justice is the standard which precedes the state, Augustine argues that in making laws, the state must follow the requirements of justice. Principally, he holds that justice is a virtue, distributing to everyone his due, while discarding the notion of conventionality of justice. Augustine relates justice to moral law and argues that justice is not limited merely to the relations between people, but the primary relationship in justice is between a person and God. Moreover, collective justice is impossible apart from individual justice, and so Augustine says, if justice is not found in one man, no more then can it be found in a whole multitude of such like men. Therefore, among such, there is not that consent of law, which makes a multitude of people. For as much as we discussed about Augustine in this lecture, it is important to note some essential aspects of his thoughts, especially those bordering on the theme of love. This is represented in the box below. Augustine says that each object of love is different, and because of this, the consequences of loving each will be different as well. This made him to assert that the human need which prompt the act of love are equally different. But then, there is some sort of correlation between various human needs and the objects that can satisfy them. Love is therefore the act that harmonizes these needs and their objects. The range of human needs includes not only objects, other persons and themselves, but chiefly and most of all is God. Study session summary. In this study session, you have learned that St. Augustine is a medieval scholar who made great contributions to philosophy and theology. 2. St. Augustine worked from within a Neoplatonistic framework and succeeded in marrying the philosophy of the ancient world to Christianity. 3. The contributions of St. Augustine to medieval philosophy span through epistemology, ethics, concept of time, and lastly, St. Augustine held the view that objects of true knowledge are ideas that are immutable. End of study session 4. Thank you for listening.